Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. My name is Matt Cuda. Today we're going to look at the A7 IV, which of course is the camera that came out after the A7 III. Is it really an upgrade? Is it worth spending the extra money on? We're going to talk about that today. We're going to talk about specifications. I'm going to talk about the overall build quality. We're going to talk about some images that I made with it. And then we're going to finish up with my conclusions. So first, let's run down through the specifications. We're talking about a 33 megapixel CMOS sensor, backside illuminated. It has a electronic and mechanical focal plane shutter. It has an ISO from 100 to 51,200, although honestly, I probably wouldn't go to 51,200. The metering is center weighted, average, highlight weighted, multi, spot. I tend to just use the multi on these cameras. I think it works the best, or it's the easiest to use. I mean, with the what you see is what you get, plus that with the multi or even spot meter for that matter, you tend to get a very good idea of what the exposure is going to look like. The exposure modes are aperture priority, manual, program, shutter priority. It has continuous shooting at 10 frames per second. Now it's 10 frames per second both on electronic shutter and the focal plane shutter. It has those 10 frames per second can shoot up to 828 continuous images. However, it should be noted that that is not uncompressed, that is compressed. If you use the option that this has of compressed lossless, you drop significantly in frames per second. So that's one caveat to using this camera. On the video, you have 4K at 24, 30, 60, and 10-bit. You have 1080p at 24, 30, 60, 120, and 8-bit. The memory cards, you have in slot 1, you have a CF Express Type A and an SD. In slot 2, you have the also a SD card. During the testing, I used a variety of SD cards. I did not use the CF Express. I did use the V90 SDXC card, and I found it to be worked very well with this camera. So I think that's a good matchup. I don't know if you really need to go the extra distance to the CF Express, except that maybe in one case, and that is if you're doing maybe some slow-mo and you feel like you need that extra oomph. It's really up to you at this point. It has the USB-C 3.2, so an upgrade on the USB. It has the multi-micro USB import. That's kind of the multi-port on the side as well. It has both Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. It does not have GPS. GPS is something that Sony has kind of stayed away from in general, although you can tether your cell phone to it to use the data off your cell phone as GPS data. I kind of wish Sony would come out with GPS, to be honest with you. I think a lot of people would like it, and you don't have to use it. You could always turn it off. So I really wish they would do that. Stabilization is IBIS Active Steady Shot and Video. It also has the new gyro data. So what happens is it has your camera has a gyro inside of it now, and it uses that data to later in Catalyst actually stabilize the image. It does crop it a little bit when it does that. Some other things to note here. You're gonna look at having a crop on the 4K video when it's in the 60p. So when it's in 60 frames per second, you're going to have a crop. That's just the way that is. Now that can be advantageous if you're a wildlife photographer like me. I mean, having the ability to have a cropped image for video, I have no problem with that whatsoever. You can always drop back to 24p and you have the full frame. The rear display is a 3-inch display, as just about every Sony camera is. You're talking about 1 million dots. It is fully articulating, which I absolutely love about these new Sonys. You know, Canon had been doing that for many years, but man, Sony has really stepped up with the articulating screens. On the rear display, it's 1 million dots, but on the viewfinder, you're talking about 3.6 million dots, which is an upgrade from the original Mark III. It has a 100% coverage and a diopter. And the focus on the AF, you have continuous AF, DMF, manual focus, and single point AF. The flash sync is 1/250th of a second. It does have an intelligent hot shoe. The battery is the NP-FZ100. The Z battery is the common battery used on all Sony products now. It's more than enough to get through a day of shooting. The weight is 2.53 pounds. Now, when you compare that to an APS-C camera coming in at 1.1 pound, like the new A6700, it does come in a little weighty, and that's a possible problem that you might encounter. The price on this on the street is going for $2,498. That's quite a bit more than the original A7 III. But you're getting a whole lot more in this camera. I really feel like I'll save some of that for my conclusions, but this is definitely a significant step up from the A7 III. It's $2,000 used, so you know, you may want to think about some other options. There's other options out there. If you're only a still shooter, look heavily at the used A9 right now. It's a great bargain out there. So that's pretty much it for the specifications. Let's move on to the build quality. Okay, let's talk about the build of the A7 IV. The build construction is great on this camera. It's A1-esque. It's very much like the A1. As a matter of fact, they have referred to this as many people have referred to this as the A1 Junior or A1 Light or whatever, baby A1. And I understand why. It's solid, it's chunky, much different than the older generation of cameras. I have the A7 R3 with me here just for comparison purposes. We're going to be comparing that. The A7 R3 is in that same generation as the A7 III, so we can see a lot of the differences. But one of the things you're going to notice right away is just a slightly different shutter mechanism here. It's a little more tilted, not hugely recognizable, but it is a little different. Up here you've got the record button, which is nice. You've got a C2 button here that can be changed to whatever you want it to. It's a custom function. The big differences here, also you have over here a separate dial. Now, what do we know this dial as, right? The exposure compensation dial. But on this, there's no label and there's no exposure compensation figures on it. That's because this is a kind of a jack of all trades button. It can be programmed to anything, this dial. It can also be locked, which was always a problem with previous exposure compensation dials. And the back dial here is a little different as well. It sits up a little differently, and you'll see that when I show you the A7 R3. The other thing that's interesting here is now you have these modes where I can switch into, say, okay, I'm talking about right here now, these little indentations right here. Okay, so you can actually turn that to like video or S&Q mode, all right? So that's how they do that in the new version. If I switch over here real quick to look at the A7 R3, which is very similar again to the A7 III, what you're going to notice here is, first of all, the exposure compensation dial. And what was bad about the old exposure compensation dials was, guess what? You'd be photographing something and oh, you gripped it just right, and all of a sudden you're at +1 compensation and you don't even know it. You're too busy shooting to pay attention. That has happened to me so many times without the lock button. The A7 III, the difference is it has this dial here. The only difference is you've got a 3 here, whereas the old one only had 1 and 2. These are groupings. Think of the 1, 2, and 3 as groupings of settings. So a 1 might, you might program that to be my landscape settings. 2 might be my birds and flight settings. 3 might be, whatever, right? So that's that. And the other thing here, you'll notice that the C1 and C2, whereas over here on the A7 IV, we have the C2 and the record button right here. So that's kind of interesting. Not sure why they did that. I mean, I really don't know why. Over here on the A7 III, as well as the A7 R3, the record button is over here for video. So that's another significant difference. But overall, I think it's a better build than the previous builds. I mean, if you look at the grip size and everything, don't pay attention to the grip down here. That's an extension. But if you look at the grip size, you can see just how, I mean, just how thick the new A7 IV really is, right? I'm okay with either one. I think if you have big hands, though, you're really going to like the A7 IV. So probably the next biggest change in this camera is that this has the flippy screen, right? Let's go ahead and turn this thing on. You've got the flippy screen, and the flippy screen is cool, right? You can rotate it. You know, why is this really cool? I'll tell you, here's another really good thing about this type. One, you can use it for vlogging, so you can face it forward, but the other thing is, if you're in a situation where you need to do a vertical, you can flip it like this, and now you're in vertical presentation, right? So now you can sit there and you can compose vertically. So I really like that. And of course it folds back in like this, just like the old style. You know, if you look at the old style, which is here on the A7 R3 and the A7 III, it just tilts out like this. I mean, you can still do verticals and horizontals, but it really only helps you when you're looking straight down on it like this, right? So, yeah, definitely a big improvement on the A7 IV with that. The other thing you'll notice on the A7 IV, if we go onto the back, you have a different joystick here. Totally different joystick. It's got a kind of a, I don't know, a dappled kind of look here. The function button's in the same place. The playback button's roughly in the same place. Delete's in the same place. The pad back here, selector pad, is all in the same place. Although on here it is a little bit more flush with the back of the A7 IV. Everything else, though, very, very similar. If we look down here, let me remove my tripod thingamabobber. And if we look down here at the bottom now, we can see the battery compartment right here. Uses the standard Z batteries. Okay. Now, what about the shutter on this? Mechanical shutter, of course, we've already talked about this, but the shutter on this is mechanical. It only fires 10 frames per second. Now, if I wanted, I've got a V90 card in here, SDXC V90. I do not have the Type A CF Express card, so I don't pay that kind of money for cards. So if I were going to do this, it would be like this. If I were going to hold down the shutter, that's a good buffer, folks. That's a good buffer. Now, we'll go ahead and let the buffer clear up a little bit there. This camera has several different modes, and if we look at them here, make sure I got you in frame. There we go. If I look at them here, let's pop this out so we're not getting the glare off that. All right, so if we look at this now, let's look at the menu. Oh, for Pete's sake, now I gotta dig for it. Okay. You have several options here. You have uncompressed, you have lossless compressed, and you have compressed. Now here's something that you need to know about the compressed versus uncompressed versus lossless. The lossless compressed, of course, will give you compression, but there's no quality loss whatsoever, right? Now, what's the catch? You're like, what's the catch then? Why do they have compressed and lossless compressed? Well, let's switch it to lossless compressed large. And let's fire that shutter. Notice the drop in frame rate, probably somewhere around 5 frames a second. Okay, let's switch it back to compressed. Okay. See the difference? Major difference, major difference. So I wanted to show you that. The next thing I want to show you, don't freak out, I know I took the lens off and it's still on, oh my goodness. I just wanted to show you the shutter mechanism. So that's the shutter mechanism. Let's pop the lens back on here. Okay. Let's see, what else can I show you on this? Of course, you got, on the bottom, you got where somebody dropped it and about smashed the pieces out of it. And then you've got your serial number, of course, and all that. Let's look at the side over here now. And let's see what we got here. You've got this typical doors that they're using now. And you remember on the old models, we had these flippy doors, for lack of a better word. I think I like the doors better, but either one's fine. I really don't care. If you'll notice here, you got the you've got the USB-C. You've got the USB multi-port right here. If we open this up, I apologize, my mower's out there mowing. You got the headphone jack right here for video, and you've got the record jack right there for inputting a mic. This other door here opens downward, which is kind of odd, but anyway. It has a full-size HDMI out for video, which is awesome. Down here you got the microphone, built-in microphone. That's really it from the outer, I guess, the build and the outside of the camera, and some of the basic features and maybe not so features, right, that are available on the body. Overall, great build, great upgrade. Again, I just love this over here, that lockable button that can be programmed to anything, and I think it's a step in the right direction for Sony. Okay, let's take a look at the images here. The first one taken with the A7 IV is this image of Soco Falls in western North Carolina. And this was taken with the Sony 16-35 Zeiss lens. So it's a little older lens paired up with this body. I think that's a lens that a lot of people might buy that would buy this camera because it's a more budget-friendly pro lens. And I think it did a very good job here for a 10-second exposure at f/13, 16 millimeters. If we zoom in here to these rocks to the right, you can see just how sharp it is. Did an excellent job with this photograph. Now we're down at ISO 80, which is actually more like ISO 100 expanded. So that's part of the story there. With an image like this, I kind of let the shadows go black, and I just like it better that way. But that came out very well. Next image, we have this hummingbird. This is a ruby-throated hummingbird taken here in my backyard bird studio. You can actually see her tongue here kind of sticking out. And this is 100%. We're looking at this thing at 100% right now. And this is ISO 2000. And the noise is almost non-existent. I can see it some in the background that could easily be knocked out in post. Everything's sharp, good image quality, just like the A7 III was. The A7 IV, just as good, if not better. Okay, so that's f9 1/8 thousandths of a second, 600 millimeters on my 2-600 Sony lens, ISO 2000. All right. One more shot here from the backyard at 32.7 megapixels here, pretty close up. And we're shooting, and the reason I included this one is I wanted to show you that I am actually using the autofocus here. You know, like I said, in the past, you'd have to focus over here on the flower somewhere and then just hope that the bird flew into the depth of field. Nowadays, with a camera like this A7, you can really go to town here. This A7 IV, it's sharp. Noise is well handled here. Again, ISO 2500 on this guy. On her, actually, that's a female ruby-throated hummingbird. This is a mandevilla flower over here. And I just thought I would show it because it's tracking. It's actually tracking the bird. And she's darting in and out and moving around very rapidly. And it's using eye detection when it can. If it can't, it locks on around here somewhere. I'm just very impressed. Very impressed. Next image, same bird, same day. Again, testing this lens. I mean, we just got amazing looking wing here. All frozen at 1/8 thousandths of a second. And this mandevilla flower over here again. And again, I'm using... Now, in this scenario, I wouldn't have had to use autofocus. But again, I'm using autofocus. It's staying locked onto the eye, staying locked onto the body, the head, whatever it needs to. It's doing a great job here. I absolutely can't complain one bit. I did crop it down to a 20.7 megapixel image. And that's great having that 33 megapixels where I can crop it down tighter, you know, and still have 20 megapixels. I mean, that's great. I could easily make over a 20 inch print out of that. So, again, very impressed with this camera. I think you can't go wrong with it. But anyway, let's move on to the conclusion. Okay, now let's talk about the pros and the cons. So we talked about specifications, but I really didn't give you a lot of hints as to what I really like in this camera. First of all, it has a snappy AF that I really like for wildlife. It locked on quickly, it tracked. I was able to track the hummingbirds moving without having to, you know, it used to be in the old days when you did hummingbird photography, you had to actually focus, you know, on the flower itself, on the kind of the rear of the flower, so you could get the bird's head in focus. Now with these modern cameras, I can easily just follow the bird around and focus on him as he moves in and out around the flowers. And it just makes everything so much easier, so much quicker. So many more keepers are capable with these modern cameras. I love the 33 megapixels. 33 megapixels is kind of a sweet spot in megapixels for me. And you say, well, Matt, why don't you like the 42? I love 42, but 33, you're still getting a good image quality. You can still got some croppability, if that's a word. I'm going to use it today. You got some croppability there. And with this camera, I did not notice any significant noise increase from the A7 III, which kind of surprised me. I thought, you know, we would see more. So really enjoyed the sensor. Great sensor. The grip, we talked about the grip already. I really like that as a pro. It's got a thicker grip and a thicker body. I think it really makes it a much more versatile camera. Again, the excellent low light performance thanks to the backlit illuminated sensor and keeping it at 33 megapixels. Love the fully articulating screen. We already talked about that. The compressed lossless RAW is kind of a disappointment. Compressed lossless RAW files are essentially files that you do not lose the highlights and the shadows, so you have better image quality. You can pull the highlights back better. The problem is it drops your frame rate. So is there really anything that's that great about it? Why not just use either compressed or uncompressed? If you're going to drop the frame rate that significantly, why not just fill the buffer up too? I mean, I'm not sure I understand where Sony was going with that with the A7 IV. I don't remember that being as much of a problem on the A1, but I could be wrong about that. I did use it on the A1, but I honestly can't remember. I like that it has the 4K 60p. And like I said, I like that it's cropped. I'm one of the few people out there that likes the crop because I'm doing wildlife. So the crop is good. I like the real-time continuous AF tracking. That is becoming so cool when you're doing video of moving animals. You know, it wasn't long ago that we had to basically use manual focus with video cameras and actually follow the subjects. And that is becoming a thing of the past. These cameras now can track, especially the A1. The A1 can track very well. This camera can track. Very impressed. That's definitely a pro. I like that it has focus breathing correction. Now, focus breathing, if you don't know, is a video problem where when you focus your camera, you actually see a zooming effect with it. Maybe you're going for that effect, you know, but you actually see the zooming effect. So what they've done is it actually crops a little bit. Sony actually crops a little bit so you can't see that, and it's a breathing compensation, they call it. The cons. I had very few cons listed for this camera. I did list 4K 60p crop as both a pro and a con because honestly, I understand why people don't want to crop that are doing video. They want the maximum quality. You know, you just have to try it for yourself and see whether you like the crop or not. It doesn't have a stacked sensor. That's to be expected. I honestly would not expect this camera to have a stacked sensor for the price point. But because of that, you're going to have a rolling shutter, and you're going, if you're doing anything that's like sports, you know, birds' wings flapping rapidly, if you pan too quickly on video, you're going to get rolling shutter. You know, it happens on still images as well. You know, you get that bowing effect, like the Boeing golf club where it's just bent like this. You know, it's a good example. Birds' wings that do this, or with a hummingbird, you might get a piece of wing up here and a piece of wing over here because it can't read through that sensor fast enough. So you will have that problem when you're using the electronic shutter. However, you can use the mechanical shutter, and 10 frames a second is right there at that threshold for me. I can use a camera with 10 frames with wildlife. You're gonna lose some wing positions and things like that. But generally speaking, 10 frames is doable. So I'm concerned with Sony that they're falling behind in the frames per second. I believe it's the R6 or R6 II from Canon that has, I think, 20 frames per second. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. On at least, I think it has it on at least the electronic shutter side. So yeah, that's something to think about. And this is a direct competitor with the R6. So that's pretty much the pros and the cons. Let me get into the conclusion here. First of all, who is this camera for? We got to go through that. This is a jack-of-all-trades camera. It's often referred to, as I mentioned previously, as the A1 Junior or little A1 or baby A1. Is it really? Yes, but the caveat is that it doesn't have a stacked sensor. And because of that, and the frame rate is not there either. So, you know, you're talking 30 frames a second with the A1, you're talking 10 frames a second with this camera. So the frames per second is a little bit faster than the A7 III, but not a whole, I think it's like 1 or 2 frames faster or something like that. So that's something to think about there. I think it's for people that are doing action. I think it's kind of a poor man's action camera. if you will. It can handle sports, it can handle wildlife. It's got 33 megapixels, so it makes a decent landscape camera, waterfalls, sunsets, all that cool stuff. So it really does, in my opinion, fall into that camp of being a camera for everyone. Would I buy this camera? Would I buy this camera? I think it would make a good backup camera. I have no plans to purchase it, but I think it would make a great backup camera. I think that it would make a good, you know, pro camera. I mean, you know, it's funny, Sony positions this camera as an enthusiast level camera. Frankly, I just disagree with Sony. I think it's a pro level camera. I think a pro could use this camera very, very easily, day in and day out, and produce awesome images. I would highly recommend this camera. If you're looking for, if you don't have a ton of money, if you say for under $3,000, it's hard to go wrong with this camera. It has all the bells and whistles that you're gonna need. The only thing I wished it had on the video side was the 120p 4K, but we can't have everything. So I hope you enjoyed this review. I hope that you'll consider the Sony A7 IV. I think you will be very happy with it. I think it's gonna be a camera that checks off the boxes for most photographers. But anyway, I want to thank you for watching. Make it a great day. And as always, get out there and enjoy nature. Bye-bye. Hey, thanks for watching this video. You know, I really appreciate everyone out there actually watching all my videos and making the comments that you do. I wouldn't do this if it wasn't for that. And I just wanted to let you know that if you really would like to help support me, there's a couple ways that you can do it. One, it costs absolutely nothing. You can click like and subscribe down below. I know you hear that all the time, but it really does help us creators out a lot, and we could really use it. The other way, of course, is you can go out to my website. I sell merchandise out there for Matt Cuda Nature Photography. I sell all my images out there, and that would help me out a great deal. Now back to the video.